Hello again, watch friends. Welcome back. How often do you look at watch dials? I mean, really look at watch dials. I'm guessing probably a lot, since a dial is perhaps the most visible aspect of a watch and most likely the feature that was most important for you when you chose that particular watch. Of all watch features, the dial may be the most important aspect since it makes visible the numerous functions of the movement. If you're like me, chances are that you glance at your watch not just to see the time. It's an object d'art and something pleasing to look at. There are a number of watch dial types or styles. Here are the major ones. Probably the most ubiquitous and maybe the most recognizable dial is the diver. There are basically two variations of this dial. One is dials with only markers, whether the indices are round, rectangular, or some other shape. The other variant is dials with Arabic numerals. This type may have numerals at every 5-minute mark or just have a few numerals at strategic positions. Sometimes there may be a combination of the two. Regardless, the dial has to be easy to read underwater, which means that these dials usually have large numbers or indices, generous lume on the hands and the markers, and generally are straightforward. Sometimes the dial contrast of color and hands are used to improve readability. Features that distract from the main goal of time reading, such as Roman numerals, additional complications like day, date, power reserve, moon phase, just to name a few, are almost rarely seen on a diver dial. And some diver dials have become icons, whether it's a Rolex Submariner or a Blancpain 50 Fathoms. They each have their own take on what a diver should look like and are emblematic of their respective brands. Another very recognizable dial is the chronograph. Not to be confused with a chronometer, which is a very precise watch regardless of the dial style. A chronograph adds a stopwatch function, if you will, to the normal hours, minutes, and seconds time display. This allows it to display both the time and a stopped time. There are quite a variety of chronograph types, each with their own corresponding dials. There can be 2, 3, or even 4 subdials, or totalizers, on a chronograph dial, and usually there is no central seconds hand. Constant seconds, what would normally be called the seconds function, is often showed in one of the subdials, and the main seconds hand is the sweep second hand for the chronograph. Occasionally, there's no running seconds indication at all. The totalizers on a chronograph dial can show elapsed seconds, minutes, or hours. When there are just 2 subdials on the chronograph, the watch is often referred to as a bicompax. Here, there may be a minute totalizer and an hour totalizer, with the central hand being the stop seconds. An alternate bicompax design is where one totalizer shows running seconds, the current seconds hand, as in a 3-hand watch, and the other totalizer shows elapsed minutes. The elapsed hour indication is omitted. The name bicompax actually came from the unit compax, or compere, which had a dial with 2 subdials at 3 o'clock and 9 o'clock, showing minutes totalizer and running seconds, respectively. Watches with 3 subdials are often called tricompax, but technically that term refers to the 1940s era watches from Zenith, which had 3 functions: chronograph, date, and moon phase. In fact, that particular watch actually had 4 subdials. It's all very confusing. The term referred to the number of functions that the watch had, not the number of subdials. There are other variations of chronographs that, while not specifically related to the number of dials, allows more functionality of the watch. For example, the double chronograph, or rattrapante, is a watch that includes 2 separate stopwatch mechanisms in order to time 2 separate events. It's a deceptively simple but extremely complex movement to execute, and has 2 hands. One hand is superimposed over the other. When you start the chrono, the 2 sweep hands start together. When you want to take a split, one hand stops while the other continues. Usually, you can have the split hand catch up to the other so you can take another split time or reset it to 0. Chronographs also have a tachometer scale either on the bezel of the watch or on the dial itself. This scale permits an average speed to be measured over a distance of 1 mile or 1 kilometer. In order to use this, the chrono function is activated at the start and end of the distance. Then the distance is read off the scale, corresponding to the chrono hand's position. The regulator dial is an interesting one, which began on wall clocks in the 19th and 20th centuries. When I think of a regulator dial, I usually think of the late 1880s United States. Maybe from watching too many westerns that always seem to have a regulator hanging on the back of the bar. Anyway, this dial primarily shows the minute hand while the seconds and hour indications are shown in subdials. The subdials are usually arranged vertically, and it's a very distinctive look. The advantage of this design is that the minutes can be read accurately since the hour hand does not obscure it. Although the regulator dial had its origin in the tradition of old precision pendulum clocks, there are interesting modern interpretations of this style. For example, the Dornbluth & Sohn has a central seconds and minute hand with the hours in a subdial and a twist, a power reserve scale at 12 o'clock. The Chrono-Swiss regulator has a more traditional layout, with the hours and seconds in subdials and a central minutes hand. This Chrono-Swiss flying regulator not only riffs on the regulator theme, but also provides high-end touches like a guilloche finish on the main dial, sunken registers to provide a 3D effect, and classic-styled hands. Who said that focusing on the minute in this style cannot also be part of a stylish watch? Flieger in German means flyer. The pilot style is inspired by German military pieces from the 1940s. They are very distinctive, their chief trait being readability. Initially used by German pilots, these pieces usually have loomed hands and indices. White hands and markers on a black background characterize this design, so as to make time reading and calculations easy in the dark and cramped spaces of cockpits. In fact, the specifications of these watches were defined by the German Imperial Air Ministry. These specs included, among other things, large crowns in order to be used with gloves, a hacking movement for precise time setting, the second hand stops when the crown is pulled out, a large and readable case diameter of 55 millimeters, and a long leather strap so as to be worn over the sleeve of a flight jacket. There are two basic designs for the Flieger. Type A, which has a usual dial layout with Arabic numbers 1 to 11 and a single triangle with two dots at 12 o'clock. The 12 o'clock indicator was used to orient the watch for time reading. The style typically has leaf hands and a central seconds hand. Type B, which has a larger minute hand than the hour hand. Arabic numerals from 5 to 55 at the 5-minute marks, and a small inner circle with numerals 1 through 12 for the hour. The smaller hour hand extends only to the inner circle. At the 12 o'clock position is a triangle which looks more like an arrow. It is generally understood that the Type B was an improvement over the Type A, since the minutes and seconds hands were more important to pilots and bombardiers to enable more accurate readings. Originally, Flieger watches were made by German brands like Stoa, Laco, and A. Lange & Söhne, to name a few. But now this style is available from any number of watch brands. So whatever you call it, pilot, aviator, Flieger, this watch has an interesting history and is a popular style. Well, those are some watch dials, or those are some dials. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Oh, and be sure to like this video and subscribe if you're so disposed.